Hey everyone, it's me HawkeyeG, and we're here with another overview video. This time we're going to be doing the Avelorn faction for the Mortal Empires campaign, so let's jump in and take a look. So, with these campaigns, the first thing I usually do is talk about the unique mechanics. Now, since Alariel is a DLC faction and not a base game faction, we actually do finally have some unique mechanics to talk about. So the first one is the Defender of Ulthuan mechanic. Now, basically what this means is you get bonuses or penalties depending on whether or not the High Elves control, or how much of Ulthwan the High Elves control. So right now you can see it says in red, that first red line, the inner ring of Ulthwan has been breached. So that means that either the gates or somewhere on the intersection of Ulthwan that someone has control that is not a High Elf. Now, it actually doesn't look like that is the case, so I'm not sure why it's saying... Oh yeah, because so you can see here the Shrine of Assyrian. It must have just been raised by Tyrion when they were fighting the Dark Elves. So even if nobody controls it, that still counts as the High Elves not controlling it, right? So the inner ring is all of the settlements here, so Etain, Safri, Avelorn, Illyrian, and I do believe that it includes the gates as well. If the gates aren't controlled, it counts as the inner ring being breached. Now, if we had this complete, if we had the Shrine of Assyrian settled, it would still say the outer ring has been breached, because as you can see, there are Dark Elves on it. Once you have everything secured, or at least held by High Elves, it'll count as completed, and you'll get bonuses. So you can see right here, basically the penalties or bonuses are public order, income, construction cost, and diplomatic relation bonuses or penalties. Now, the longer that you go with the inner ring being breached or the outer ring being breached, the worse the penalties get. The inner ring is at the worst rate, the outer ring is at the best rate. Once you control it all, they actually go to positive bonuses and they start increasing at a different rate. So let's just take a look at that real quick so you can see what it looks like when things are good. So here we can see the island is completely under our own control. We have total control over it. You can see the trust is up to 100% because we haven't lost any sections of it in a long time, giving us a public order bonus for all provinces, income for all regions, diplomatic relations bonuses, growth bonus, leadership bonus for all armies, right? So it gives you some pretty good bonuses. It's not... I don't know, it's not too severe, especially the penalties. The problem is it can hurt you in the early game, but they generally don't get too severe, and as long as you do your part on taking care of the inner island, you can usually get that squared away pretty easily, and from there on, the penalties aren't too bad. So it's not too bad to manage. These are some good bonuses, but they're not too strong. It's really nice to have that public order, and it's one of the reasons people often justify taking the Sword of Cain as Alariel. But that's how this mechanic works, right? This is what it looks like at the best state when you have control of everything. So it's just kind of nice to have. The one thing to know about it is basically what happens is it won't get fully reset, but you have to kind of be careful of, especially if you control the island yourself, you have to be careful because any faction that comes in and takes just one territory away from you will knock this down pretty hard. It'll do some decent damage because you go from all of it being under your control to the outer ring has been breached, even if you lose a single settlement. So that's really the only time you'll see this get reset. Otherwise, you just kind of gradually build up to these bonuses. So that's how the Defender of Ulthuan mechanic works. Going back to an earlier look here at the start of the campaign, the next thing I want to look at is this buff that Alariel gives called the Power of Nature. So you can see it here in the province effects. Now, this bonus gets granted to a province anytime Alariel ends her turn there. So you can see it's pretty simple, right? Influence, 1 influence, 3 public order, 10 growth, 5 untainted, and 10 winds of magic power. The buff, I believe, lasts for 5 turns. It might be something more like 8, but so it's basically you have Alariel sit in Evershale and you end your turn. And at the start of the next turn, this buff will be applied. It applies to the whole province. That doesn't necessarily mean it works on everything. Yeah, it looks like it's probably even 10 turns long. So here you can see, I mean, in the gate, public order is never affected. So you're not going to see the public order effect, but you still get the influence bonus. So it's really good early on for helping to maintain your public order, for building a little bit of influence and growth. It can even help turn things around in a corrupted province if you need to. But so that's just another little unique mechanic of Alarielle. The next thing I want to talk about for the faction is this unique building at the Gaian Vale called the World Roots Entrance. It's unique because it allows Alarielle to recruit some Wood Elf units, while the Avelorn faction to recruit some Wood Elf units. You can get this building as any faction, really, but because you start here as Alarielle, it's kind of unique. She actually has a skill in her unique stat line, or her unique skill tree, that gives some bonuses to these units as well. Honestly, though, I don't really find them to be useful because of the other special thing about Alarielle's faction, which we'll talk about in a bit. But so you can see here that you would get access at Tier 1 to Dryads. Now, if you have all the DLC for this game, you'd also have Rangers, and I don't know that one of these is particularly better than the other. In fact, I basically don't use them because why use, Rangers and Dryads? These are damage dealers. Well, so are archers, right? And the typical formation for high elves is just to go spearmen and archers. You can use some of these units, and maybe you want to do a melee focused playthrough, and that's okay. And in that case, these might be good units, but in general, their stats just feel kind of misleading. Dryads usually just don't seem to do very well. Yeah, I mean, you can see they're weak against armor. Technically, they have magic attack. They really don't have that bad of stats, but they seem to underperform regardless. You can also get Treekin, which again is the same thing. These look like they should be a good defensive unit with some decent damage. They've got armor, they've got high melee defense, but again, they're just kind of underwhelming in terms of performance. And frankly, these are super weak to missile units, and especially if we're talking a high elf campaign early on. I mean, you're fighting high elves, you're fighting dark elves, so missile, especially going up against the gate, right? The Treekin at the Phoenix Gate, useless. They just get shot to pieces. You can see out of all the units in the army from this fight, I mean, the Treekin and the Dryads took about as much damage as the Illyrian Reavers, and you try to keep these out of the battle as much as possible, right? So it's the other part of the problem is, it's not, well, it's a pretty expensive building, and the bonuses just aren't that good, right? Upkeep for forest spirit units, well, that's only good if you're putting a bunch of these kinds of units in these armies, right? Growth plus 10, that's pathetic. Untainted plus 6, that's also pathetic. For a tier 5, right? The bonuses for this building aren't that good. If you're planning on using these units, you certainly can, but again, they just don't seem, they feel pretty underwhelming, right? I'd rather have spearmen with shields than having Treekin, because the Treekin just get shot to bits even with the armor, and especially if we're going up against dark elves, their dark shards have armor piercing anyway, so they don't seem to perform as well as they ought to. The melee defense is nice, but that's about the only good thing I can say about them. Dryads are just, despite the fact that they have 60 armor and they have decent melee attack and defense and even magical damage, don't do that much damage. Treemen, I really shouldn't say anything bad about. A Treeman stack can be, like a Doom stack of Treemen, can be really good as the Wood Elves. Obviously, that could work for the High Elves too, especially with Alarielle and some life magic. But by the time you get to Tier 5, I mean, is this really the way you want to go? Maybe, but why not just do dragons or something? Probably just because they're more expensive. But even then, you're probably not going to go, by the time you get to Tier 5, you're not going to be spamming Treemen, right? And so that actually brings me to the last thing I want to touch, or the next thing I want to touch on here, which is a change that Alarielle gets. So Alarielle's faction, Avelorn, is the one that introduced the Sisters of Avelorn to the game as a DLC unit. And as part of that, the Avelorn faction gets a separate building called the Handmaidens Gallery. Now, a recent update changed the Grove building so that it combined the Handmaidens Gallery and the Grove together, and just put the Sisters of Avelorn and the Handmaiden at Tier 4 of the Woodlands building, right? For the Avelorn faction, you actually get the Handmaidens Gallery still as a separate building, and you get it at Tier 3. Now, having Sisters of Avelorn at tier 4 to tier 3 it might not seem like a big difference, but for those of you who understand that it really is a big difference, right? You can see I have a tier 2 province here. We're only on turn 6, but I only need a 2 population surplus to get it to tier 3, right? And I'm going to be able to get that upgrade next turn. Whereas you need a 4 population surplus to get a city to tier 4, and that's going to be exponentially more growth, right? This is about a total of 500 growth to get the 2 population surplus you need. I don't have the numbers offhand, but I would say it's at least 2,500 growth to get 4 population surplus, if not more. So you can get that much earlier. In addition, if you watched either my other campaign overviews or really any High Elf gameplay at all, you'll know that Sisters of Avelorn are one of, if not the best unit in the game. The Sisters of Avelorn Doomstack is a very real thing that people utilize a lot. And they're just extremely powerful. It's one of the best ranged unit in the game. It's certainly the best ranged unit for the High Elves. And you can get it at tier 3, right? You can get it much, much earlier on in your campaign. So instead of considering playing around with like something like White Lions of Shrace, or maybe switching into some cavalry if you're going up against Skaven, right? You just go straight into Sisters of Avelorn right from the start of the game, and you get them very early on. So I think those are the most significant bonuses that the Avelorn faction has. Those are the unique mechanics that it has, and the big pieces to talk about that that set off the faction a little bit differently from everyone else. So one other little unique thing that I want to mention as well before I forget is that the appearance of the Gaian Veil is a little bit of a bait, right? So if you were a Wood Elf, you'd be able to fill all these slots because this is like a magical forest climate or whatever, but not as Avelorn. You can see here grants 7 construction slots in the settlement. So that's one thing that makes this campaign a little tougher. While this looks like a 9-slot settlement, it actually isn't. You can see we're at tier 3, but we only have the 3 slots, and we have to unlock the next 2 at tier 4, these 2 at tier 5, and these ones will be forever blank on this campaign. The one bonus that they do have that I want to mention as well, the influence cost minus 25% for intrigue at court actions. This is the mechanic that allows you to improve relations between yourself and another faction, or 2 other factions, or worsen relationships between 2 other factions. This sounds really nice, but in my game, it didn't really seem to come into play too much, just because the amount of influence you need to spend, or the amount of times that you need to do the influence activity to really affect your relations, it's either going to be like low enough that it's not going to cost you much, right? Like you can see here, this is only going to be 4 to improve my relations. Most of the time, the cost is either too low to matter, or it's too high to matter, right? 25, and maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe it really is helping me if I say the costs are too high, but you just kind of get to a point where you have such a high influence income that when you're going to spam out influence actions, you just feel like it's not noticeable, right? And maybe it would be if I really did the math on it. But it's either going to be your influence costs are so expensive that 25% isn't going to feel like enough because it's going to cost a ton of influence anyway, or it's going to be too low. So I wanted to mention it, but I don't think that's a significant part of the campaign. So with that being said, I do kind of want to walk through the campaign here, walk through my path to it, and just kind of talk about how I completed the campaign. So I do think that this campaign is very similar to a Tyrian or Etain campaign. I mean, I feel like that's kind of obvious, right? You know, Etain starts on the south of the inside of the island. Avelorn starts on the north on the inside of the island. They are both high elves. They both have a very similar unit roster. They both have access to similar territory. They both start fighting dark elves, etc., etc. They even have almost identical climate suitabilities. So you really don't go too far off the script here. I mean, you could, but I don't really see a reason to, right? So the first part, secure your province, potentially securing the north. As a Lariel, you do have this gate. So I find that it's... I don't know, I'm not in a big rush to take Nagaryth, just because it's unpleasant climate, and I like to occupy the inside of the ring, right? Safari, pretty much never likes you no matter who you are. I mean, they like me, well, they dislike me only slightly here. I am also playing a very hard campaign, this campaign, so it did affect my relations with other people a little bit and my ability to make diplomatic deals. But you'll see, for Avelorn, since it's a pretty standard campaign, it didn't matter too much. But yeah, I usually like to secure the inside of the ring, right? No matter who you're playing as, whether it's Etain or Avelorn, taking over some of these internal provinces, these are way easier to hold. You can be a lot greedier with what you build in it. You can focus more on economy. And like I said, if I take this Phoenix Gate, this is a pretty easy one to hold. You can take some pretty ridiculous fights at the Phoenix Gate and not really struggle to hold it. So that's just something to keep in mind. So yeah, the first step, secure the inside of the island. So conquering the inside of the ring goes pretty much like it always does. I declare war on Safri, like I usually do. You build up just a nice army of spearmen and archers, and as soon as you can get something to tier 3, I still usually put the archives in here because that's tied to research, and you're going to eventually want this maxed out, whereas the Handmaiden's Galley, since it's tier 3, you can put it in one of your minor settlements. So you can produce Sisters of Avelorn pretty dang early on in this campaign. In this case, the Dark Elves invaded. I don't know if I would say this is early necessarily, but they decided to come over here and start fighting. So this actually gives me a good opportunity to, having fought Safri and defeated them, I can now fight the Dark Elves to gain popularity and relations with Illyrian, and ultimately just confederate Illyrian instead of having to fight them as well. Once you are able to confederate or take control of the inner ring, as well as having pushed the Dark Elves off the outer ring, you certainly can pursue the Dark Elves to their home, and you see I still have a little bit of cleanup to do here. But what I usually like to do is try to take advantage of eliminating as many of the minor factions as I can before leaving the island, right? I want to secure it for myself. We already saw that the Dark Elves came over and attacked Tiranoc and fought them successfully. I don't want to leave another weak point on the island like Shrace, especially seeing as they lost the Shrine of Cain to rebels. Especially because we have this Defender of Ulthuan mechanic now that we're playing as Avelorn. So, before I leave the island, I usually like to secure it as best I can. You kind of leave the minor you leave the playable factions alive because you probably want to confederate them eventually. I don't know if it's necessarily worth the work of trying to confederate all the minor factions, especially because the playable factions might wipe them out instead. So usually it's in your best interest to kind of go to war here and take them over. If everything goes well and you're doing things right, you should be able to take out these minor factions with ease. I mean, especially taking out Safri early on and being able to take control of these 3 provinces in the center early on should give you the strength and the income you need to take on these minor factions, even if they're doing a decent job of expanding. But it's usually not too hard to wipe them out, and especially because you can just stack a mass of Sisters of Avelorn at this point in the campaign. Once you take control of the ring itself, right, and you can see here we're already kind of taking control of it and putting it under our control. Once you control the island and you feel confident and it's fairly secure, then it's probably time to move and attack the Dark Elves as per usual. Otherwise, they're going to continue to present a threat against you. They're going to continue to attack you. And rather than play defense for all time here, I mean, you're going to want to go after them eventually. So, with any luck, you take out Morathi, take over the province. This is one of the more valuable provinces in the game, so it's a really good one to take over. And from here, you kind of have to make your next decision. Really, this decision is, do you want to befriend the Lizardmen or not? And this kind of is situational, right? In this campaign, Nagaryth is doing very well. So I'm going to choose to let Nagaryth and these other forces keep the Dark Elves at bay themselves, while I take over the Lizardmen. It's easy to take them out while they're still pretty weak, and most of their territory here in the central island area is good for you. You know, it's either all suitable or unpleasant for the High Elves here. But it's good territory, it's easy to take and hold down, and the real question is, if your main opponent is the Dark Elves, can I grow faster than them by fighting somewhere else, right? And so that's kind of where you want both your primary and secondary objectives to lay as you're playing through your campaign. So for me, the next step is to take out the Lizardmen. Otherwise, potentially, if the Dark Elves are doing well and Nagaryth is doing poorly, you would move to take out the Dark Elves instead. You'd probably try to befriend the Lizardmen. So ultimately, the direction that you go isn't as important as just conceptualizing what your plan is, right? The first step of this maneuver is to just establish a solid defensive position from which to fight. So if we're talking about going to the north, you probably want to try to consolidate yourself in the Doomglades province if you can get Val's Anvil and build some defenses. This is pretty much it's a good cutoff point, right? Even regardless of who's holding the Temple of Adioth, if you have it or you don't have it, as long as the Dark Elves don't have it, right? Taking a few provinces or a few territories here and being able to kind of create a good cutoff point for you to get yourself a foothold from is important. Otherwise, the same thing is true down here, and quite frankly, I don't think you want to overcommit into the jungle in the south early on in this campaign. I think you want to take out the Dark Elves, and because their territory is good for you. So here in the south, you just kind of want to take the southern jungles of Pahualaksha province and solidify it, right? If you can get some defenses on these bottom two settlements, you can take the rest of it economically. And really, like I said, it's about making the decision of whether you can grow faster than your opponent or not. Around the same time, you should probably have the resources and the income to start considering a secondary objective. In my case, I realized that since the magical forests are good territory and the wood elves are going to have some aversion towards me, I was going to try to take that next. Really, the end game there is by fighting the wood elves, I increase my friendship with Bretonnia. Here I had to force the issue a little bit. You want to try to make friends with somebody before invading their lands. Of course, that doesn't pan out exactly how I envision it in this campaign. But the point is, you want to have a secondary objective, right? Your primary objective is pushing the Dark Elves and taking their land. The secondary objective could still be taking the jungle territory here, or it could perhaps even be fighting the Greenskins or the Norska. Whatever the objective is, you want to try to use it as a way to assist in diplomatic relations with a future potential ally to help you secure the victory conditions that you're looking to achieve. If things continue to go well, the territory you have taken should develop quite nicely. You should be able to use it to boost your economy a little bit and increase your power. There's a good chance if your campaign plays out like this one, you can see that I've now confederated Nagaryth. Keep in mind that with any confederation, especially at this stage of the game, you have to be willing to lose stuff, right? You can see that my territory here is scattered, my military is not in position, and I don't really care. Again, like I talked about before, since I moved south initially and I've established this choke point, my next move in the north is not to take everything, it's to establish my next choke point, as you can see I'm attempting to do here. You also have to consider allies and enemies amongst some of these, smaller groups. Like I said, with the Wood Elves in the east, I also kind of want to attack the Witchwood. We have to do some diplomatic play with the Broken Chains to get them to help allow us to fight them without interfering with things with the Tomb Kings, because they make a good ally. In addition, we've kind of started things here in the east that hasn't really developed yet, so we'll look into that more in the future. But basically, like I said, you don't be afraid to lose some ground when you make a big stride like this or a confederation. What you really want is to solidify your approach and then consolidate your forces and take everything at once. You shouldn't be afraid to lose a couple of small settlements in a scattered territory like this until you're fully committed. And like I said, even you could see these are still developing a little bit. We need to give it more time to develop before I really have the strength to commit to both my main project and my side project that I've got developing here. So here you kind of get a glimpse of why I recommend trying to consolidate things and make sure that you're secure on any potential front line before you move forward. Before I could really make a move against the Wood Elves, I ended up fighting Carcassonne just so I could forcibly have a foothold to fight from of my own, and that led to me having to fight the Skaven, who are still very much alive, and it looks like the Pirates of Sartosa are going to be next. just because that's the best option for me here, right? Plans can change. In the meantime, you can see, like I said, I've lost some ground here, but we're kind of just letting these other forces stalemate each other. Just like we did earlier when I moved south to fight the Lizardmen, you just kind of let this stalemate continue. Sure, I've lost some territory, but it doesn't really matter. I've been able to secure this, and really the focus has been more on this secondary territory, right? I haven't had to work very hard to maintain control of this region and keep it for myself, whereas I've, again, gained a lot of territory over here, which is going to propel my growth forward at a much more rapid rate than anybody over here, right? This is kind of still a stalemate. Nobody's really gaining a mass amount of power by fighting over this territory at the time, whereas I'm gaining a lot of power by fighting over here. So it may have taken some time, but you can see, like I said, I took out Pirates of Sartosa, and I've been able to continue to build alliances. As you can see again, I have like military access agreements with the Empire, Clan Angrand, Carcassonne, so we're kind of building towards that late game order tide, right? If you want to win the game, it helps to have the victory conditions to complete it, right? And so getting these people to like give you military alliance control of their capital for the victory condition is important, or just military access to be able to move through their territory without penalty, easily establish trade agreements. But you can see that my forces from down here were eventually able to wrap up to the north and take over my little secondary side project. So having a side project to either advance your strength rapidly or to build diplomatic relations is a good point for these kind of campaigns and in general. And so in this campaign, mine was the little magical forest, just because of the bonus that Alarielle gets. In the meantime, you can see that, again, the building of strength and growth, right? Now that my economy from both this like southwestern front and this southeastern front have really built up and developed, I have the ability to fight on two fronts at once, right? I have a good amount of forces on my little side project, but I've also been able to really consolidate things and just capture everything here on the east. In addition, that amount of strength buildup allowed me to confederate Tyrion. As per usual, you want to continue confederating people where it's convenient and allowing your allies to continue to exist because they can field a bit more armies than you because of the AI bonuses, so don't be afraid to use that to your advantage to allow you to kind of balance to maintain a balance of power that's appropriate for your growth that keeps everybody else kind of in a stalemate. By this point in the campaign, everything should be going well for you. You should have a strong economy. You should have a strong military. I mean, we're in the Snowball Phase now, right? We're at the end of the Snowball Phase. We've been able to develop our economy on several fronts. We have the forces to push 2, if not 3 separate objectives at the same time. You can see I'm easily wiping out the Dark Elves up here. I actually created like a third objective for myself of fighting down here for the southwest. This is because there's a couple of good territories down here and nobody really strong enough to hold any of it from me. But we can start by taking out the Vampire Coast and not the Dread Fleet, Lokir Felheart, the Blessed Dread, right? So we can fight some enemies here to gain alliances of convenience, and then we can later betray those alliances and capture all this territory for ourselves. We also, again, in the interest of kind of having a secondary objective for the sake of diplomatic relations, we're over here fighting the Greenskins as well. This is kind of terrible territory to navigate, but as a faction of order, you're fighting the factions of destruction. You're opposed to them, and I mean, at this point in the campaign, you can really play it out however you want. Going over here and me fighting the Greenskins isn't even necessary. It is nice that I had managed to pick up Black Crag and Karaz Karak, so I don't even really need these military alliances in order to secure my victory conditions. But you don't have to. This is like almost a bit of an overextension, or it would be if I wasn't already so strong. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it, right? This is what the end of a campaign looks like. We're huge. We're pushing war on 3 different fronts at the same time. We easily have the forces to repel the chaos advancement when it appears. We have the positive diplomatic relations with some of the other strong factions in the game that will allow us to either survive or just instantly grasp the victory conditions, and we might not even have to fight chaos directly if we don't want to. that's pretty much it. If you don't want to have allies, or if you don't want to get victory conditions through military allies, be prepared for some weirdness to occur. You're going to have to either betray people or make some very carefully planned breaking of trade agreements and securing invites to war from somebody else. But that's pretty much it. I hope that this overview gave you some information on how to play the Avelorn faction, what its unique mechanics and traits are, what kind of units it brings to the table, and how it changes the campaign, even if only slightly, as well as giving you kind of a path to victory through at least some of the steps that I took and perhaps some of the alternatives that I think you could pursue as well. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.